Hello, Tony. We're going to talk about the carbon oxygen cycle today and essentially talk about the importance of photosynthesis and cellular respiration once again. I love talking about the carbon and oxygen cycle just because I think it is absolutely so interesting how two processes can drive such important things on planet Earth. Essentially, without them, we wouldn't be alive. So, let's start with talking about what plants do with carbon and oxygen. So, plants consume billions and tons of carbon in the form of carbon dioxide every year. Okay. In fact, most of the carbon, there's much more carbon than animals and plants release from cellular respiration. We're going to talk about human impacts later on. Okay. A lot of our atmospheric carbon dioxide actually comes from forest fires and the breakdown of organic materials by decomposers. So that's some of the ways that carbon dioxide is released into our atmosphere naturally. Again, we're going to speak about the human impacts at a later time. Now, the one thing that you have to understand is that the carbon cycle has two parts to it. One which we would call the slow cycle, and the other which we would call the rapid or fast cycle. All right. So CO2 and carbon dioxide and oxygen are rapidly cycled or the fast cycle in photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So we hopefully remember those connections, the idea of the process of photosynthesis and how taking those products and adding them into cellular respiration to be our reactants and how those two processes drive everything. That is what we would call the fast cycle of this biogeochemical cycle. The slow cycle is a bit of a different story. So the slow cycle of carbon happens when we talk about trees and the ocean. So trees in the forest act as large carbon sinks. Essentially, that just means they absorb a ton more carbon than they actually emit into the environment. That's why when we talk about, or you hear about whole rainforests being cutting down or not planting enough trees to replace the trees that were cut down, it's actually really, really detrimental to our overall environment because we release tons of carbon into the atmosphere with nowhere to stick it. That just hangs out in our atmosphere, okay? Which is one of the leading greenhouse gases. Another place that carbon hangs out in is the ocean. What it does is it actually dissolves the carbon dioxide and it's stored in the ocean floor as methane. And methane is actually released through volcanic activity, and that is kind of another way that we release sulfur as well. So methane is found on the ocean floor, and that's where CO2, as it's dissolved, will be stored along the bottom of the ocean. Now, the cool thing about the carbon found in the ocean is that large numbers of phytoplankton or plankton, that is plants and algae, actually can incorporate this carbon into their structures. And then that's how when you consume or heterotrophs consume those different types of food, that carbon can actually move through the food chains. Okay. Another part of this is that we understand that over millions of years, as things decompose and break down, you then start to incorporate things into rock, it becomes sedimentary rock, and it gets pushed down and pushed down. And eventually, we can actually make fossil fuels and deposits with fossil fuels having carbon. So that's another one of those interesting facts about carbon. So this is a chart you have in your notes. And essentially, it's just showing the breakdown of the rapid cycle versus the slow cycle. So anything with kind of the green stuff, so atmosphere, biotic environment, and surface of the ocean, those are just kind of the parts of the rapid cycling. The slow cycling is found along the bottom in the deep ocean, the Earth's crust, and the petroleum fossil fuels. So what you're looking up at the top at atmosphere is this is just showing essentially the connection between photosynthesis and cellular respiration. We see photosynthesis entering the biotic environment, so meaning the plants are releasing oxygen for us to use. We're using it and releasing it through respiration, so giving them back carbon dioxide. Okay, so that's the first kind of cycle off on the left-hand side, photosynthesis back to respiration. Now, the atmosphere also deposits into the surface of the ocean carbon dioxide, which gets released down into the deep ocean. Now, sometimes in the deep ocean, it'll eventually become fossil fuels, or it can be released back out through evaporation, which we learned about the water cycle. So as water evaporates off of the surface, some carbon dioxide will come with it. Okay. Another part that we kind of haven't really talked about very much is this abiotic processing, which is essentially the sedimentation of rock, taking along nutrients and things like carbon dioxide, settling it into the Earth's crusts. Then, when your Earth's crusts have things like a volcanic eruption or shifting, like an earthquake under the ocean, it actually is going to go through a process called weathering, which is essentially wearing down of the rock to release the nutrients, which releases it back to the ocean surface, which can cause evaporation again. So then this part here is part of the fast cycle. Dead organisms can also drop it down into the deep ocean, but then that goes through the slow cycle. Another quick part of the fast/slow cycle is once you hit this fossil fuels part, this bottom slow cycling takes a long time. But we then add carbon back into the fast cycle through something called combustion or burning of fossil fuels. So this is, like I said, the side of it that is the human impact side that we're going to talk a bit more about. So when we are discussing the sulfur cycle, the next one, we're really going to get into this idea behind petroleum deposits, fossil fuels, and human impact. Please make sure that you've watched the carbon oxygen cycle video and added the cycle to your notes. And I'll talk to you soon.